August 17, 1944, Tours 47 p.m. Normandy hedgerows, 3 miles south of Falaise. Hauptmann Klaus Brenner pressed his face against the hot periscope of his Panther tank, scanning the sky through the narrow slit. His crew had learned to fear that sound, the distant thunder that wasn't artillery. The American Jabos were coming. Through his headset, he heard Lieutenant Werner's voice crack from the 2nd Panther. "Thunderbolts, 9 o'clock high, 4 of them." Brenner's driver, Corporal Schmidt, whispered a prayer. They'd survived 3 years on the Eastern Front, facing waves of T-34s. They'd knocked out Soviet tanks at ranges the Russians couldn't even see them. But this was different. Against Soviet armor, you could fight back. Against what was diving toward them now at 400 miles per hour, there was only one option: run, hide, and pray the camouflage held. Before we continue with Hauptmann Brenner's story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Normandy, August 17, 1944, where Hauptmann Brenner was about to experience why German tankers called the P-47 the Flying Executioner. The first rocket hit Werner's Panther before Brenner could even shout a warning. The 5-inch HVAR rocket punched through the thinner top armor like a hot knife through butter. The explosion lifted the 45-ton tank 6 inches off the ground. Secondary detonations followed as ammunition cooked off. Werner never made it out. Neither did his crew. The entire engagement, from the moment Brenner spotted the Thunderbolts to Werner's death, lasted 11 seconds. Brenner screamed into his radio, "Reverse, into the trees, now!" Schmidt threw the Panther into reverse at full throttle. The massive tank crashed backward through a hedgerow, just as 8 streams of 50-caliber bullets chewed up the ground where they'd been 3 seconds earlier. Each P-47 carried 8 M2 Browning machine guns. When all 4 Thunderbolts opened fire simultaneously, they put 200 rounds per second into a target area. Brenner had seen what those bullets did to tanks. They couldn't penetrate frontal armor, but they didn't need to. They shredded vision ports, destroyed tracks, killed commanders stupid enough to keep their hatches open, and, most importantly, they kept tank crews buttoned up and blind while the rockets did the real work. The P-47s made another pass. This time they weren't shooting at Brenner. They'd found the supply convoy that was supposed to meet his platoon at the crossroads. Through gaps in the foliage, Brenner watched 3 fuel trucks explode in sequence, each blast big enough to feel through the Panther's thick armor. 17 trucks, destroyed in 90 seconds. The Thunderbolts circled twice more, hunting. Then they were gone, their massive Pratt & Whitney engines fading to the west. Brenner waited 5 full minutes before emerging. That was the protocol now. The Jabos often circled back. When he finally opened his hatch and climbed out, Brenner counted the cost. Werner's Panther was still burning. The supply convoy was gone, every vehicle either destroyed or burning. And somewhere in the smoke, he could hear wounded men screaming. His platoon was combat ineffective. Not from Soviet tanks, not from artillery. From 4 American fighter planes that had spent less than 3 minutes over the target. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the new reality of armored warfare in the West. Klaus Brenner was 29 years old in the summer of 1944. A veteran of 22 tank battles, stretching from the outskirts of Moscow to the beaches of Normandy. He came from Heidelberg, the son of a university professor who'd never wanted his boy to join the Wehrmacht. But Klaus had volunteered in 1939, drawn by the mystique of the Panzerwaffe, Germany's armored fist. He'd been good at it. By 1941, he commanded his own Panzer III in Russia. He'd survived the winter of 1941-42 outside Moscow, where men froze to death in their tanks. He'd fought at Kursk in 1943, where he'd knocked out 6 Soviet tanks in a single day. He'd received the Iron Cross, First Class, from his regimental commander. He'd been promoted to Hauptmann and given command of a platoon of Panthers, the finest tanks Germany produced. Klaus was 5'9", compact for a tanker, with the permanent squint of a man who'd spent too many hours staring through periscopes. He had a wife in Heidelberg, Anna, and a daughter he'd only seen twice, born during his last leave in 1942. The photograph he kept tucked in his jacket pocket showed a blonde 3-year-old girl he barely knew. He planned to know her. He planned to survive this war. But by August 1944, survival had stopped being about tactical skill or technical superiority. It had become about something else entirely, whether the sky was clear or cloudy. The problem emerged gradually through the spring of 1944, then exploded into catastrophe after the Allied invasion of France. German tankers had always dealt with enemy aircraft. Soviet Sturmovix were dangerous. The Il-2 ground attack planes carried rockets and bombs, and they'd claimed plenty of panzers. But the Sturmovix were slow, vulnerable, and the Luftwaffe could still contest Soviet airspace. In the east, you had a fighting chance. In the west, there was no Luftwaffe, not in any meaningful numbers. The Americans owned the sky, and they'd turned their fighter planes into tank hunters. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't supposed to be a ground attack aircraft. Republic Aviation designed it as a high-altitude escort fighter, a flying fortress meant to protect bomber formations at 25,000 feet. At 14,000 pounds fully loaded, the P-47 was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Allied pilots initially called it Jug, short for Juggernaut, and meant it as an insult. It was big, it was heavy, and it didn't turn like a Spitfire. But what the P-47 could do was dive, and carry, and survive. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine produced 200 horsepower. Its thick wings could carry 4 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets. Its 8 50-caliber machine guns carried 3 400 rounds of ammunition, and its radial engine and armored cockpit could absorb punishment that would down any other fighter. P-47s came home with entire cylinders shot off their engines. They came home with control surfaces shredded. They came home when no plane should have been able to fly. The Americans discovered almost by accident that this massive, heavily armed fighter made a perfect tank killer. The revelation came from 2 factors. First, by mid-1944, Allied air superiority was so complete that P-47 squadrons were running out of German planes to shoot down. They needed targets. Second, the ground commanders in Normandy were screaming for close air support as German armor chewed up Allied advances. Someone, accounts vary on exactly who, asked the obvious question: what if we sent the Thunderbolts after tanks? Between June 6 and August 25, 1944, Allied fighter bombers claimed 928 German armored vehicles destroyed or damaged in France. The P-47 units accounted for more than half of that total, statistics that panzer commanders initially dismissed as Allied propaganda, until they watched it happen. Hans Dietrich was the first of Brenner's friends to die to a P-47. Dietrich commanded a Panzer IV in Brenner's company. They'd served together since Kursk. He was 26, from a small village outside Stuttgart, engaged to a schoolteacher named Elizabeth. He carried her letters in a waterproof pouch and read them aloud to his crew during quiet moments. He and Brenner had made plans. After the war, they'd open a garage together. Dietrich was a mechanical genius who could keep a panzer running with spare parts scavenged from wrecks. Brenner had the business sense. Brenner and Dietrich Motors, they'd decided, will rebuild anything on 4 wheels. July 18, 1944, 3 miles northeast of Caen. Dietrich's Panzer IV was moving up to support a counterattack when a flight of P-47s from the 406th Fighter Group caught his platoon in open ground. Brenner was 800 meters behind, watching through binoculars. The Thunderbolts came in low, so low their rockets left white smoke trails all the way to impact. Dietrich's tank took a direct hit on the engine deck. The HVAR rocket, designed to sink submarines, punched through the thin rear armor and detonated inside the crew compartment. The Panzer IV exploded with such force that the turret separated from the hull and landed 15 feet away. Dietrich and his crew died instantly. No time to bail out. No chance to fight back. Elizabeth's letters burned with everything else. Brenner pulled Dietrich's body from the wreck that evening. What was left of it? He threw up twice. He'd seen men die in dozens of ways during 3 years of war, but this was different. This was clinical, surgical, executed from the air by pilots who'd never see their victims' faces. That night, Brenner sat in his command tent and added Dietrich's name to a list he'd been keeping. Names of men killed by aircraft. The list was getting longer than the one for men killed by enemy tanks. The pattern repeated, again and again and again. July 29th, Lieutenant Becker's entire platoon caught in a column near Coutances. 4 Thunderbolts destroyed 7 tanks in a single pass. Becker survived but lost both legs. August 3rd. Hauptmann Vogel's company ambushed by 8 P-47s while refueling. 19 vehicles destroyed. Vogel killed trying to man the anti-aircraft machine gun on his command tank. August 8th. The entire 2nd Company caught in open farmland by American fighter bombers. 15 tanks destroyed in 12 minutes, 73 men killed. 3 survived by abandoning their vehicles and hiding in a drainage ditch. The numbers were staggering. In Russia, Brenner's battalion had averaged 4 to 6 tank losses per month from all causes. In France, they were losing that many per week to aircraft alone. The American pilots had developed tactics specifically designed to kill tanks. They worked in pairs, one plane making a strafing run to suppress any anti-aircraft fire, the second following immediately with rockets or bombs. They attacked from different angles simultaneously, preventing the tanks from presenting their strongest armor. They targeted supply vehicles first, knowing that tanks without fuel were immobile targets, and they were everywhere. The Americans flew what they called armed reconnaissance missions, patrols looking for any targets of opportunity. German tanks couldn't move during daylight without being spotted, couldn't refuel, couldn't reposition. The massive Panther and Tiger tanks, technological marvels that could destroy any Allied tank at ranges beyond retaliation, were reduced to hiding in forests and praying for clouds. Brenner watched his battalion commander, Oberst Friedrich Hartmann, aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Hartmann had fought in Poland, France, and Russia. He'd commanded tanks since before Brenner joined the army. Brenner found him one evening in August, staring at a map covered with red marks, each one indicating a vehicle lost to air attack. "You know what they told us in training?" Hartmann said without looking up. "Tank warfare is a duel between armored opponents. The better crew, the better tactics, the better position. That's what wins. We were taught to fear enemy tanks, anti-tank guns, mines." He tapped the map with one finger. "Nobody taught us to fear this. Nobody prepared us for an enemy we can't even shoot at. I lost 42 vehicles last week. 42. Do you know how many of those were destroyed by enemy tanks? 5. 5 out of 42. Hartmann looked at Brenner directly for the first time. "We're not fighting a ground war anymore. We're just targets in a shooting gallery." By mid-August, German tank crews were showing signs of what later generations would call combat trauma. Men flinched at the sound of aircraft engines, any aircraft engines, even German ones. They refused to move during daylight. Some crew members deserted rather than enter their vehicles. Officers reported that veterans who'd fought for years without hesitation were freezing when ordered to advance across open ground. One of Brenner's gunners, a 19-year-old named Paul Richter from Hamburg, broke down completely after watching a P-47 strafe a convoy. Richter had been a gunner for 18 months, had knocked out 11 Soviet tanks, had never shown fear. But after the air attack, he refused to enter his Panther. He just sat on the ground, shaking, repeating, "We can't fight them, we can't see them coming, we can't fight back." The battalion doctor diagnosed battle fatigue and evacuated Richter to the rear. 2 days later, Brenner learned that Richter had stolen a bicycle and tried to ride back to Germany. The military police caught him near Paris. The court-martial took 20 minutes. They shot him for desertion. Brenner understood Richter's breakdown better than he wanted to admit. The psychological impact of the air attacks was crushing. Against Soviet tanks, even when outnumbered, there was always something you could do. Maneuver to a better position, use terrain, fire first, fight back. Against the P-47s, there was nothing. You heard the engine, you saw them diving, then you died, or you didn't. It was random, arbitrary, like being selected by some mechanical god who didn't care about your skill or experience or will to survive. What none of them realized was that the worst was still coming. The Falaise Pocket, August 12, 21, 1944. Brenner's battalion was trapped along with the remnants of 2 German armies, roughly 100 Reichswehr men caught in a shrinking perimeter as American, British, and Canadian forces closed the noose. Hitler, in his infinite strategic wisdom, had ordered them to hold and counterattack. But you can't counterattack when you can't move. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies, unlimited visibility. For 9 days, Allied fighter bombers flew continuous missions over the pocket. P-47s, P-51s, Typhoons, Tempests, dozens of squadrons rotating through, attacking anything that moved. The Americans called it a fighter pilot's paradise. German soldiers called it hell. On August 17th, the day Brenner lost Werner's Panther, the 406th Fighter Group alone flew 246 sorties into the pocket. One flight of 4 P-47s reported destroying 21 vehicles in a single mission. Not tanks, vehicles, trucks, half-tracks, staff cars, ambulances. The Americans weren't discriminating. They were hunting everything. Brenner's company tried to escape on the night of August 18th. They moved cross-country, lights off, navigating by moonlight. They made it 4 miles. At dawn, when they were forced to hide in a forest, they counted their losses. Started with 9 Panthers, reached the forest with 5. 4 tanks destroyed by aircraft, 1 by running off a bridge in the darkness. 20 men dead, 37 wounded, for 4 miles of movement. The forest provided some cover, but not enough. A P-47 pilot spotted the camouflage netting around noon. Within minutes, 8 Thunderbolts were circling. They didn't even use rockets, too valuable for confirmed kills. They just strafed with their machine guns, systematically, like foresters marking trees. They didn't need to destroy the tanks. They just needed to keep them pinned. Then the artillery arrived. Allied forward observers, following the circling aircraft, brought down fire on the forest. By nightfall, 3 more Panthers were burning. One of them was Brenner's. He and his crew survived only because they bailed out 30 seconds before an artillery shell hit the fuel tank. They spent the rest of the night walking west, joining thousands of other German soldiers, trying to slip through the Allied lines. Brenner carried nothing except his Walther P-38 pistol and the photograph of his daughter. He made it out. 73 men from his battalion made it out. They'd entered Normandy with 843 men and 61 tanks. The American P-47s and their British counterparts had killed more than half the men and destroyed all but 3 of the tanks. In the chaos of the Falaise Pocket retreat, Brenner encountered a major from a Tiger battalion. The man had lost his entire unit, 14 Tiger tanks, the most powerful armored vehicles in the world. Not to American Shermans, which their 88mm guns could destroy at 2 meters, to aircraft. The major, whose name Brenner never learned, was drunk on liberated cognac. He grabbed Brenner's collar and said something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. You know what the worst part is? The Ivans, the Russians, they're brutal. They throw human waves at you. They lose 10 tanks for every one of ours. But at least they fight like men. These Americans, they don't even fight. They just execute us from the sky. We're not soldiers to them. We're just targets. He took another drink. Give me 100 T-34s over 4 Thunderbolts. At least with the Ivans I can shoot back. The Major's statement encapsulated what every German tanker in the West had learned. The psychological and tactical dynamics of armored warfare had fundamentally changed. It wasn't about better tanks or better training anymore. It was about who controlled the sky. The numbers supported the Major's assessment. Comprehensive Luftwaffe intelligence reports, captured after the war, showed that German tankers feared air attacks 4 times more than enemy armor. When surveyed about combat stress factors, 76% of German tank crews rated aircraft as their primary concern. Only 18% rated enemy tanks. Soviet commanders had a different problem. They had numerical superiority, usually 3, 1 or 4, 1 in tanks. They compensated for tactical and technical inferiority with mass. German crews could handle that equation. Outnumbered but not helpless. Allied air superiority offered no such equation. There was no tactical response to being attacked from above by aircraft you couldn't shoot down, couldn't outrun, and usually couldn't even see coming until they were already firing. What Klaus Brenner had stumbled upon, or rather what had been forced upon him, was a revolution in combined arms warfare. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't just an effective ground attack aircraft. It was a demonstration that air power, properly applied, could neutralize even the strongest ground forces. The innovation wasn't in the P-47's design. Republic Aviation had built it to be a high-altitude escort fighter. The innovation was in how the Americans used it. They'd taken a tool designed for one purpose and adapted it brilliantly to another, discovering in the process that 8 50-caliber machine guns and 10 rockets made a better tank killer than any ground-based weapon system available. The P-47 pilots developed techniques that maximized their effectiveness. They attacked in pairs or flights of 4, coordinating their runs to hit multiple angles simultaneously. They learned to target the thin top armor of German tanks, armor designed to protect against ground fire, not aerial rockets. They perfected the art of the dive bomb run, coming in at 400+ mph, releasing weapons at 500 feet, then pulling up with enough altitude to avoid ground fire. German anti-aircraft defenses proved largely ineffective. The quad 20mm Flak 38 that many tank units carried had a maximum effective range of 2,010 meters against aircraft flying at medium altitude. P-47s attacked from dives starting at 8,0 to 10,000 feet, accelerating to speeds that made accurate ground fire nearly impossible. By the time the anti-aircraft crews could track them, the Thunderbolts had already released their weapons and were pulling up. The P-47's rugged construction helped too. The massive radial engine could absorb remarkable damage. There are documented cases of P-47s returning to base with multiple cylinders shot off, flying on less than half their normal power. The pilot sat in an armored bathtub surrounded by bulletproof glass. German tankers reported hitting P-47s with everything from machine gun fire to 20mm cannon rounds, only to watch the aircraft continue their attack and fly away. But the real innovation, the thing that made the P-47 so effective against German armor, was something that couldn't be measured in technical specifications. It was the combination of total air superiority, excellent pilot training, and the willingness to use expensive fighter aircraft in the low-altitude ground attack role. The Americans weren't protecting their fighters for air-to-air combat. They were throwing them into ground attacks because they could, because they had so many. Because they controlled the sky so completely that losing a few planes to ground fire was an acceptable cost. German commanders understood what was happening. They just couldn't stop it. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, commander of Army Group B, wrote in a report dated August 10, 1944, "The enemy's air superiority has such a paralyzing effect on our movements that any planned operation is rendered extremely difficult, if not entirely impossible, to execute. The troops are forced to hide by day and can only move by night. Even these night movements are increasingly difficult, as the enemy has remarkable night-flying capability." He concluded, "Our panzers are the best in the world, but they are useless if they cannot move." After Falaise, Brenner didn't see another Panther tank for 3 weeks. He was reassigned to an ad hoc infantry unit, equipped with a Kar 98K rifle, and told to help hold the Siegfried Line. It was September 1944. The war would last 8 more months, but for Germany's armored forces in the West, it was effectively over. The remnants of the panzer divisions that escaped France were pulled back to Germany and refitted. New tanks were built, Tigers, Panthers, even the massive King Tigers. But without air cover, without fuel, and with Allied fighter bombers patrolling every road and rail line, those new tanks mostly sat in depots, waiting for fuel that never came. Brenner fought as an infantryman through the winter of 1944-45. He was wounded twice, once by shrapnel, once by a bullet through his left shoulder. He was captured by American troops in April 1945, 3 weeks before Germany's surrender during the collapse near Nuremberg. He spent 14 months in a POW camp in France. The Americans treated prisoners reasonably well, adequate food, medical care. He spent most of his time in the camp library, reading anything he could find that wasn't about the war. He was repatriated to Germany in June 1946. His wife Anna was alive, living with his daughter in the bombed ruins of Heidelberg. His daughter, now 7 years old, didn't recognize him. It took 3 months before she'd call him Papa. Klaus Brenner never talked about the war, Not to Anna, not to his daughter, not to anyone. When asked, and in post-war Germany everyone had been asked, he'd say he'd been a tank commander and leave it at that. He didn't mention Dietrich, he didn't mention Werner, he didn't mention the Falaise pocket or the hundreds of men he'd watched die. He got a job as a machinist in a factory that made agricultural equipment. He worked there for 31 years. He was good at it, reliable, quiet. The kind of employee who showed up every day and did his work and didn't cause problems. He never learned to drive a car, couldn't. Every time he sat behind the wheel, he heard that sound, the distant thunder of radial engines. His daughter later told an interviewer that her father would flinch whenever an airplane flew overhead, even commercial airliners, even decades after the war. He died in 1982 at age 67 from complications related to his war wounds. His obituary in the Heidelberger Tageblatt was 3 sentences long. It mentioned his 31 years at the factory. It mentioned his wife and daughter. It didn't mention the war at all. His daughter, cleaning out his apartment after his death, found a small metal box hidden in the back of his closet. Inside were his military decorations, the Iron Cross, his tank commander's badge, some medals she didn't recognize. There was also a notebook, a leather-bound journal that he'd kept during the war. The journal was mostly technical notes, tactical observations, maintenance logs, ammunition counts. But there was one entry, dated August 18th, 1944, that stood out. It was the only emotional entry in the entire book. Lost everything today. Tank, most of my crew, all illusions about what war has become. We thought we were soldiers. We thought skill and courage mattered. We were wrong. This isn't war anymore. It's industrial slaughter, and we're on the wrong side of the equation. The Americans have turned their fighter planes into flying artillery, and there's no answer for it. You can't outfight a P-47. You can't outmaneuver it. You can only hope it doesn't see you. Hans is dead. Werner is dead. 40 good men dead in a week, not from enemy tanks, from airplanes. How do you explain that to their families? How do you tell a mother that her son, who survived 3 years in Russia, died in France because an American pilot he never saw dropped a rocket on his tank from 2,000 feet up? If we survive this, I'm never setting foot in a tank again. I'm done. It was signed and dated. His daughter donated the journal to the German Tank Museum in Munster. It sits there today, in a display case alongside Allied gun camera footage of P-47s attacking German armor. The footage is silent, but visitors can see what Brenner saw: streams of tracer fire, rockets leaping from wings, explosions, smoke. The display includes a quote from an American P-47 pilot, Captain Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron. Tank busting was dangerous, but it was effective. We'd catch them in columns, trapped on roads or stuck in traffic. It wasn't really a fair fight. We could see them, they couldn't see us until we were already diving. But war isn't fair. We had the better position, so we used it. The museum estimates that P-47 Thunderbolts destroyed or damaged more than 300 German armored vehicles during the war. Tank commanders like Klaus Brenner faced them and learned, too late, that technological superiority on the ground meant nothing without control of the air. There's a small memorial at the Falaise Pocket battlefield. It lists the names of Allied soldiers who died closing the pocket. It lists German soldiers buried in nearby cemeteries. Klaus Brenner's name isn't on it. He survived. Hans Dietrich's name is there. So is Lieutenant Werner's. 37 other men from Brenner's battalion are listed. The memorial doesn't mention how they died. It doesn't explain that most of them were killed not in tank versus tank combat, but from the air. It doesn't explain the revolution in warfare that the P-47 represented, but the veterans knew. The men who survived the Falaise pocket, on both sides, understood what had happened. The Americans had proven that with total air superiority, ground forces, even elite armored units, were helpless. It was a lesson that would shape military doctrine for the next 8 decades. Klaus Brenner understood that lesson in August 1944, watching his friends die one by one. He understood it during the long walk out of the Falaise pocket. He understood it during every flinch at the sound of an airplane for the rest of his life. The massive American fighter that was supposed to escort bombers had become something else entirely, the most effective tank killer of the war. And the German tankers who faced it learned to fear the roar of its engine more than any ground-based weapon. If this story moved you, if you learned something about a forgotten aspect of World War II, hit that like button right now. These stories need your support to reach more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of innovation, courage, and the human cost of war. And drop a comment below. Did anyone in your family serve in World War II? Do you have stories about the air war or tank combat? We want to hear from you. Thank you for keeping these memories alive.